So what is holistic time, and what does it have to do with astrology, witchcraft, resurrection? And one of the reasons I think Halloween is a good holy day for Christians. And why am I at a cemetery? I've always liked cemeteries. I feel more in touch with reality at them, and I'd be outside right now, but it's windy and you wouldn't hear me. It's just hard to be deluded about yourself at a graveyard where everyone's equal and all the things that people played at in their lives, well, it wasn't necessarily what they thought, but also was maybe more than they thought. So holistic time. People talk about different things being holistic. What would it mean for time to be holistic? It's kind of a trick question because nothing could be holistic by itself. There's no such thing as holistic time separate from holistic space, holistic matter and energy. The whole point of things being holistic is that you see them as a whole and not as just separate elements. We actually think of time as, at least a lot of times, we think of time as a separate and different thing from space, matter, and energy. And maybe even think of it as a line, a timeline, where an arrow going, wait, which way are you seeing me? An arrow going this way is the past. There's this little line marking the present, and then the arrow going this way is the future. And it's all just a series of snapshots. And whatever is on the line that way, it's a number line. And that's gone. That's past. It's gone forever. Each moment is kind of this separate snapshot that's disconnected from every other. And once it's gone, it's gone. And the present is just going to become one of them. In the future, same thing. And so our idea of time itself, among modern people, is kind of fragmented, and also the connection of time and space and matter and energy. But they didn't think that way in ancient times, and it's not because they thought that was wrong. They just hadn't thought of that. They lived in the world where the material and the spiritual weren't separate things, and space and the things occupying it weren't separate. And the change of those things from moment to moment didn't disconnect them from each other necessarily. So the time wasn't this abstract thing that existed in itself, separate from everything in the world. It was more like just the dynamic change that happens to what always remains real. And I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but I'm talking about an overall kind of impression, kind of just the intuition of how the world works. We think of it in these fragmented ways, and they're useful. It's useful to think of time separately, but scientists have come all the way back around to seeing that time and space are one fabric, and even that matter and energy are not separate from time and space. It's almost like they're little knots twisted into this fabric of time-space. That's what particles of matter are, and that's interchangeable with energy. But I'll get to that. So time, in a holistic sense, for ancient people, time wasn't just this thing that was, it flowed and what happened before was gone. Actually, the future was above you and the past was below you. Why? You already know this, because people looked up at the stars and they saw that the stars are on these very steady paths that don't change. And they're so mathematically precise that they could be predicted for thousands of years exactly what the stars will do. So the stars are kind of, if you could go by anything with certainty for the future, it would be the stars. So people who want to know the future would look at the stars, right? And so there's this idea in astrology that, which is just like stargazing essentially, which is the idea that the stars have a sure future. So learn your future by becoming acquainted with the stars. And also, the sun is up there, and all the energy that, and therefore the life and the energy that gets converted into matter, that gets converted into our bodies, that all comes from the sun, and the forces that are exerted on the earth, like the tide that comes from the moon, and the weather obviously has a connection to these things. It has a connection to the stars shifting back and forth, the zodiac shifting back and forth through the seasons. So the heaven is determining what happens, and we know that the future is going to happen according to what heaven does, right? So the future comes down from heaven, whereas the things that have already happened, they, once they pass their prime, they kind of sink down into the earth, they decompose. You get buried, you go back to the dust, the part of you that didn't come from heaven, and just kind of disintegrate. But there's always a residue there. There's always some potential that you had, that everything had, that it didn't fully use in its life. And so then when people are buried, they go down. The things of the past, the civilizations of the past, they're all down there. So that's the underworld, naturally. Just like the world above you that you can literally see is determining the future, the world under your feet is what has been. And it still has all this potential energy in it that was unused in its short lifespan. And so witchcraft, is tapping into that. It's getting in touch with the things under your feet, the spirits of the dead that are down there, the power that's only partially decomposed, and still a lot of it's available, which, by the way, oil today and all the technology that comes from oil, just a different version of witchcraft. Anyway, I won't get into that. So, and also because heaven is unyielding, because the patterns and the paths of the stars never change, they can be tyrannical, and heaven can be seen as tyrannical. The fates are cruel and unforgiving. And so, but we can't reach them. So the earth and the partially decomposed powers that are in it down here, those are things that we could tap into and maybe accumulate some power from ourselves, to have some say for ourselves, to at least hold the forces of fate from heaven at bay. So doesn't it make sense? These are kind of intuitive pagan ways of thinking. And I never say pagan with a dismissive or derogatory sense. We're all pagans, and I'll do a video about that later. But in a pre-Christian pagan way of thinking, this is kind of how it works. And it makes sense that a lot of people would form an alliance with Mother Earth, which is the realm that Mother Earth holds, the underworld. Mother Earth holds all of the elements and the living creatures and the things where a witch would derive their power. So everything is a power play, right? Okay. Let's see. Am I ready for the next part? Did I set that up right? Resurrection. Am I to that step yet? Because when Jesus came, he came to a world, full of people with these kind of ideas, which are, they're, hopefully you can see they're intuitive, and they're not just superstitious. They actually are good intuition of science in a lot of ways, what science has shown us. But so Jesus's thing was healing people and exorcising demons that would oppress, control, and torment people, and even raising people from the dead. And you don't have to believe that he did those things. Like if you're listening, to appreciate what I'm about to say, but just appreciate that was his reputation. People saw him as a person who did those things, and he definitely did that for people in their experience. And then there was this inexplicable, mysterious occurrence of him rising from the dead after his own death, and people believing in that, and so strongly that, well, it changed the world. But here's the thing. In all those things he did that he was known for, the healing, the exorcisms, the raising from the dead, it's all essentially cleansing people. All right? He would go touch people. He would associate with people that others wouldn't, because they were considered unclean. That was the whole system of morality for the Jews in that time, was cleanness versus uncleanness. And in fact, he would forgive people, and healing somebody and forgiving them was practically the same thing. Why? Well, because anything associated with heaven, that where life comes from, is clean. Or anything associated with life, really. But then death is this enemy that's constantly pushing toward life and trying to overwhelm it. And so there's all these things that are associated with death and related to death, and that lead a community to death. And so those things are all like bad. They're sin. You got to clean them off of you. And a lot of them you just can't. And if you're in a certain physical state of a chronic physical or mental disorder, you're just out of luck, And Jesus would touch these people and associate with these people and welcome these people and tell them you're forgiven, and heal them, and cast out the disturbances that they call demons, whatever you want to think that they were. And so he had this aggressive holiness. They'd had this defensive holiness, where protect yourself from the unholy, from the unclean, from everything associated with death. And he had this I'm going to go out into the realm of death. And, here's the thing. Love cleanses everything it touches. He wasn't concerned about losing his own perfect purity and being able to go worship in the temple. He knew that he had a more intimate personal connection with God than that. And he had his own things to say about the temple, but he wasn't worried about getting kicked out of it. He kicked the temple out because they weren't showing love. And instead, he went around and created a temple by showing love and cleansing those who were considered unclean. And they even said he raised the dead. And then they said that he rose from the dead. And they saw him, and they swore by it till their dying day. And other people, died similar agonizing deaths because of they weren't afraid of death anymore because of him. So here's the thing. To them, Jesus had cleansed death. And I was just thinking about this a few months ago and realized that way of looking at it. And I still haven't gotten my head around that and what all that means. But it makes sense of a lot of things. Like that in the early church, they were known to be the ones who would stick around when a plague hit a city, and everyone would leave to try to get away from it, and Christians would stay and tend to the diseased. Why? Because I guess they weren't afraid of death. But it wasn't just that. They didn't have this sense that death was this fearful thing anymore. And that they were somehow morally and spiritually compromised by exposure to things related to death and even to sin. There was this sense that, Jesus wasn't afraid of sin. He wasn't afraid of oh, what do I do in this morally compromising situation? He didn't worry about that. He just went and showed people love. And because he was confident in that way, he was very confident about telling people when they were doing things that were self-destructive. So it's not like he thought death wasn't an issue, or that sin wasn't an issue. He wasn't afraid of it. Rather than be afraid of it, he went and cleansed it with love. And he cleansed the whole realm of death. So that's what they believed, was that Jesus cleansed the realm of the dead, because what they said was he went down there. This is how they grappled with it, and like a generation later, they were explaining it this way because they didn't know how else to explain what had happened. He went down into the realm of the dead, and he freed all the captives and brought them up with him. And so, so what does that mean? Like I said, I still haven't worked it all out, and I don't want these videos to be too long. So a couple things anyway. Like, for example, why I think Halloween is a good holy day for Christians. I've always loved words, and even when I was a little kid, I wanted to know, I liked the sound of Halloween, and I wanted to know why it meant what it meant, why it was called that. And it had, in the Lord's Prayer, he said, "Hallowed be thy name." Holy. And so I thought, well, that it means it's a hallowed eve. To me, I thought, well, Halloween it's a holy night. That's not exactly what that means. It's related, but I think it is a holy night. That is the right way to see it. The right way to see it is that death is cleansed. The realm of death is not something to fear and even to think of as an enemy anymore. It makes sense that right at first it's like, yes, Jesus showed death, take that, death. But now it's like, okay, it's like death isn't even something to fear anymore. The people who have died, they've just gone around the corner. They're still there. They're still here. They don't disappear. And not just in like a creepy way. I guess I understand if that sounds creepy, but not if evil is not. I mean, what is evil? Evil is whatever leads to death. And love cleanses everything it touches, including death. Love melts away evil. And so the things that people celebrate on Halloween, scary monsters and ghosts and, which I love all those things. They're parts of God's good creation. And they're not something to demonize. St. Peter had this vision that he saw all kinds of wild animals that Jews were not supposed to touch or eat. And Jesus saying to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." He said, "No, how could I do that? I've never eaten anything unclean." And Jesus said, "What I have made clean, don't call it unclean." And so to me, Halloween is this holy night of celebrating that he's made everything clean. That the whole world is holy. It's all sacred. It's not that doing evil things is good. There's some really evil, messed up things. But they're not a threat when you understand that love cleanses everything it touches. And so, go out into the realm of death and spread that holy cleansing of of the Lord of life and death by your own presence, And there's the reason that it's called, actually, the real reason that it's called Halloween is it's All Halloween, it's short for All Halloween, which is one day of All Hallowtide. The day after, it's All Hallows Day. Hallows is just the Old English word for saints. And it's because in the early church, they didn't believe that the dead were really separate from them anymore. And they didn't have that despair anymore. And on that day, All Hallows Day, they celebrated that they're with us and they're actually helping us and they're actually alive.